Your four favorites are I Saw the TV Glow, Nowhere, Suspiria, and Synecdoche, New York. The hardest part about these videos is that I just write down all the movies that come to mind and then try to narrow down my choices and come up with explanations after. And so many times I just have a gut feeling about a movie with absolutely no explanation. And there was one movie that seems like it would be a stretch to recommend based on your four favorites, but I just can't shake the feeling, so I'm going to trust my gut and recommend Blue. You just strike me as someone who'd appreciate experimental cinema, and you seem to be drawn to queer stories. And like Suspiria, Tilda Swinton is in this movie, or at least her voice is. And like Synecdoche, New York, it's a meditation on art and mortality. I guess I was able to come up with an explanation after all, but I think my top choice for you is Liquid Sky. The director of I Saw the TV Glow cited this film as an inspiration. It's got the neon, queer, sci-fi vibe of Nowhere. And like Suspiria, some of the characters mysteriously disappear. Another one of my top picks for you is Heavenly Creatures. It's a coming-of-age film involving queer characters, fantasy, and escapism like I Saw the TV Glow. Like Nowhere, it depicts the alienation of adolescence. Like Suspiria, it's got feminine energy and violence. And like Synecdoche, New York, the characters use their art to create a sort of shared fantasy world to cope with their reality. Perfect Blue, like I Saw the TV Glow, blurs the line between fantasy and reality and explores pop culture, obsession, and identity. Like Nowhere, it was released in 1997. Like Suspiria, it's about performance and transformation. And like Synecdoche, New York, it blurs together art and reality as well as performance and identity, leaving the protagonist questioning what's real. Kamikaze Girls, like I Saw the TV Glow, depicts a high school student who forms an unlikely friendship with someone who ends up having a pretty big influence on their life. Except in this movie, the protagonist is obsessed with Lolita fashion instead of a TV show. I also think this movie has some queer undertones. Like Nowhere, it's a hyper-stylized depiction of youth culture. And like Suspiria, it's got a lot of feminine energy and the characters undergo transformations, except in this movie, the transformations are more psychological or in terms of their personal style. Like I Saw the TV Glow, Velvet Goldmine uses pop culture to explore queer identities and self-discovery. Like Nowhere, it's a late 90s hyper-stylized bisexual film. Like Suspiria, it's about art and performance. Also, Tom York is heavily featured on the soundtrack for this movie, which feels fitting because he composed the score for Suspiria and there's a Radiohead song in Nowhere. And like Synecdoche, New York, this film is about art and identity. Holy Motors, like I Saw the TV Glow, depicts a destabilization of identity or the fluidity of identity. Like Nowhere, it's chaotic and surreal with saturated visuals. Like Suspiria, it's about the body, performance, and transformation. And like Synecdoche, New York, it blurs the boundary between performance and reality. A Bride for Rip Van Winkle, like I Saw the TV Glow, explores how media and social pressures shape our sense of self. Like Synecdoche, New York, some of the characters are actors, but they're performing in real life. But instead of actors playing actors and the self-reflexive aspect of Synecdoche, in this movie, people hire actors to play guests at their wedding. Like Nowhere, there's this sense of alienation and characters navigating relationships and sexuality. And it doesn't really have anything in common with Suspiria, but I guess technically they both involve performance, except in this movie it's acting instead of dancing. And both films depict women undergoing transformations, except in this film it's more psychological than physical. Tropical Malady is a surreal film about identity like I Saw the TV Glow. It's also a queer film about desire like Nowhere. It has some supernatural elements like Suspiria, but in a much more subtle, shape-shifting, mythic, dreamlike sort of way. And like Synecdoche, New York, it plays with narrative structure in a way that makes it feel symbolic and enigmatic. May has the horror and bodily transformations of Suspiria with the alienation and queer characters of I Saw the TV Glow and Nowhere. And like Synecdoche, New York, the protagonist uses their imagination in a way that distorts their perception of reality. Thelma is a queer coming-of-age film like I Saw the TV Glow and Nowhere, but it's also supernatural like Suspiria. Since you've got films with queer characters or queer subtext in your favorites, and I Saw the TV Glow depicts a character figuring out their identity and gender expression, I think you might enjoy National Anthem and maybe Saturday Church and My Life in Pink. Short Bus is about identity, desire, and self-discovery like I Saw the TV Glow and depicts the intersecting lives of queer characters like Nowhere. I feel like I need to throw in some more horror films since two of your favorites are technically horror films. So I'm going to recommend Possessor, which is about identity like I Saw the TV Glow, has characters who are pretending to be someone else like the performance aspect of Synecdoche, New York, and it's sci-fi like Nowhere. Plus this film can be interpreted as a trans allegory like I Saw the TV Glow. And another horror movie that I want to recommend is Hellraiser. I don't even really have an explanation for this one, it just feels right to me. Since you like Nowhere and already saw all the Gregg Araki movies I would have recommended, a couple movies that have a somewhat similar vibe are The Rules of Attraction and Party Monster. And even though none of your favorites are documentaries, I think you'd like Dick Johnson is Dead because it's about performance and mortality like Synecdoche, New York.